Barley, water, and yeast. On paper, nothing could be simpler. Yet this is the recipe for single malt Scotch, a spirit so complex it can take decades to reach its first sip. Every bottle carries the risk and the hope of choices made years ago. Will barley's enzymes unlock the right sugars? Will peaty smoke linger in memory? Will a Stillman's cut bless or doom a batch? The process is so exacting that a single decision during malting or mashing can echo through generations of whiskey. The secrets behind transforming grain into liquid history begin long before a cask is ever filled. What happens first will define everything that follows. Barley arrives at the malt house with one job ahead: to be transformed from a hard, starchy grain into the living heart of whiskey. Eilidh, the maltster, scoops a handful of raw barley and lets it spill through her fingers. She knows every kernel by feel. This is where the process starts, and where mistakes echo for decades. Steeping is the first step. Barley is soaked in cool Scottish water for up to 60 hours, tricking the grain into waking from its dormant state. As moisture seeps in, the barley begins to sprout, and enzymes like alpha amylase and beta amylase stir to life inside, ready to break down the grain's starches into sugars. Timing is everything. Too little water and the enzymes stay locked away. Too much and the grain drowns, wasting the precious starch needed later. Eilidh measures the temperature, checks the humidity, and listens for the faint crackle that means the grain is breathing. After steeping, the barley is spread across the malting floor, a tradition that lingers in only a handful of distilleries today. Eilidh walks the rows, turning the grain by hand to keep heat and moisture even. Over 4 to 6 days, the barley grows tiny shoots. The air fills with the earthy scent of life in motion. This is germination, and it is where the foundation for every Scotch flavour is laid. Once the shoots reach the right length, germination must be stopped before the barley consumes its own starch reserves. That is when kilning begins. Barley is shoveled onto perforated floors above a roaring fire. In some distilleries, peat bricks cut from ancient Scottish bogs are added to the fire. As the barley dries, it inhales the peat smoke, absorbing phenols that will linger through every stage of whiskey making. Some malts from Islay reach phenol levels of 40 to 50 parts per million, giving them their signature smoky punch. Others skip the peat, aiming for a clean, cereal sweetness. Above the kiln, a pagoda roof rises, a Victorian invention designed to vent smoke and heat. Today, these roofs stand as icons of Scotland's whiskey heritage, their silhouette a promise that tradition still matters. By the end of kilning, the barley is dry, its enzymes preserved, its flavour destiny set. Eilidh runs the malt through her hands one last time before it moves on, ready for the next stage. The groundwork is laid. Enzymes are awake, the smoke is in the grain, and the story of single malt Scotch is already written in every kernel. Inside the mill, dried malted barley is transformed into grist, a careful mix of 70% coarse grits, 20% husk, and 10% fine flour. This ratio matters. Too much flour, and the mash sticks. Too little, and precious sugars are left behind. The Porteous mill, a fixture in Scottish distilleries for over a century, hums as it cracks each kernel open, exposing the starch for what comes next. The grist is tipped into the mash tun, a vast vessel waiting with its own rules. Here, temperature is the language of sugar. The crew adds the first water at 63 to 65 degrees Celsius. This is where alpha amylase enzymes, awakened during malting, get to work, breaking down starch into maltose and other fermentable sugars. The mixture thickens, turning porridge-like as the room fills with a warm, sweet aroma that hints at bread dough and fresh cereal. After the first extraction, the spent grains are not discarded yet. A second water, this time at 70 degrees Celsius, is poured in to coax out every last bit of sugar. Finally, a third water, nearly boiling at up to 88 degrees Celsius, scours the grains clean. This third runoff is often recycled for the next batch, a nod to both tradition and efficiency. This method, known as the 3 waters rule, ensures nearly all the starch is converted and collected. What flows out is called wort, a clear amber liquid rich in sugars with a gravity between 1.060 and 1.070. The husks and draff, now spent, are set aside for local farmers' cattle. The wort is cooled, ready for the next transformation. In the mash house, the air is thick with the scent of warm grain and anticipation. The work of the enzymes is done. The sweet wort is now prepared for the alchemy of fermentation. Cooled wort waits in the shadow of the washbacks, giant open-topped vessels built from Oregon pine, larch, or gleaming stainless steel. The choice of material is more than tradition or aesthetics. Wooden washbacks, alive with invisible communities of bacteria and wild yeasts, add faint, creamy and nutty notes. Stainless steel, easier to clean, delivers a sharper, more predictable profile. Every distillery swears by its own method, but all agree what happens in these tanks shapes the soul of the whiskey. Yeast enters next, a living catalyst. Most distilleries use carefully selected strains of Saccharomyces cerevisiae, chosen for their reliability and the flavors they coax from the sweet wort. Some experiment with wild or house yeasts, chasing complexity and a sense of place. The transformation begins almost immediately. The room fills with a low, restless bubbling as yeast cells devour sugar, releasing ethanol, carbon dioxide, and heat. The surface froths and churns. Switches, rotating arms, cut through the foam, preventing overflows and mixing the fermenting liquid. The real magic is invisible. As yeast feasts, it creates a vast array of byproducts known as congeners, flavor compounds that give single malt its character. Among the most important are esters, formed when alcohols react with acids inside the fermenting wash. Isoamyl acetate brings a whiff of banana. Ethyl hexanoate hints at green apple. Ethyl acetate offers pear and floral notes. These esters are delicate and easily lost or overwhelmed, but in the right balance, they layer the whiskey with fruit, flowers, and subtle sweetness. Fermentation time is the distiller's secret weapon. A short, intense ferment, around 48 hours, produces a wash rich in higher alcohols and spicy, nutty undertones. Extend the process to 96 hours or more, and the yeast has time to create a bouquet of esters, pushing the flavor toward orchard fruit and spring blossoms. Some Speyside malts owe their signature lightness to these long, slow ferments. Others, like those from the Highlands, favor punchier, more robust profiles. The washbacks themselves play a role beyond flavor. In wooden vessels, resident microbiomes, lactic acid bacteria, and wild yeasts quietly influence the outcome, especially in longer ferments. Stainless steel, by contrast, offers sterility and consistency, favored by distilleries seeking a cleaner, more controlled result. Yet even the cleanest system cannot erase the unpredictability of living fermentation. Each batch is a negotiation between yeast, sugar, temperature, and time. After 2 to 5 days, the riot of activity subsides. The wash now resembles a strong, cloudy beer, hovering around 8% alcohol by volume. It is sharp, sour, and layered with the raw flavors that will survive distillation and years in oak. The yeast has spent itself, leaving behind a liquid that carries the memory of every choice made so far. This is the foundation for the spirit to come, a complex, living snapshot of grain, water, and time, ready to face the fire of the stills. Inside the still house, the air shimmers with heat. Iain, the stillman, stands watch over the copper pot stills, his eyes fixed on the sight glass as clear spirit begins to flow. For centuries, copper has been the silent partner in this process. Its surface draws out sulfur compounds from the vapor, binding them away as copper sulfide. Without this reaction, the whiskey would carry harsh, vegetal notes, an unyielding edge that no amount of aging could soften. The wash, now a strong, cloudy beer, enters the first still and is brought to a rolling boil. Alcohol boils at 78 degrees Celsius, rising as vapor, while heavier compounds stay behind. The still's shape matters at every turn. Tall, slender necks, like those at Glenmorangie, force the vapor to climb, encouraging reflux, where heavier elements fall back and only the lightest, most delicate flavors escape. Short, squat stills, favored at Macallan, allow more oils and weight to pass through, creating a spirit with heft and depth. Each curve and angle is a fingerprint, shaping what will become the heart of the whiskey. Distillation is done twice. The first run in the wash still produces low wines at about 28% alcohol. These are collected and transferred into the spirit still for a second, more selective boil. Here, Ian's job becomes a test of nerve and instinct. As the spirit emerges, it divides into 3 streams: the heads, the heart, and the tails. The heads, or foreshots, come first, volatile, sharp, and laced with methanol and acetaldehyde. These are dangerous, unusable, and must be discarded. Then, for a brief window, the heart arrives. This is the purest cut, rich in ethanol, layered with esters, and carrying the promise of fruit, flowers, and subtle sweetness. Too early, and the spirit is harsh. Too late, and it grows oily and heavy as the tails or feints creep in with fusel oils and bitter notes. Iain leans in, nose hovering above the spirit safe, hands steady on the brass levers. He watches the flow, judges by scent and taste, and makes the cut, not by clock or machine, but by experience. The decision is final. Once made, it cannot be undone. A moment's hesitation could cost thousands of liters or save a batch from ruin. The pressure is real, and every stillman carries the memory of near misses and triumphs. In that instant, the future of the whiskey is decided. The heart is collected, crystal clear, at 65 to 75% alcohol by volume. It's the culmination of every choice so far: grain, yeast, water, and now, the hand of the stillman. This new make spirit is raw, bracing, and full of potential. From here, it will meet oak and time. But the purity, the weight, and the promise of the whiskey are set in copper and fire, in the silent judgment of the cut. Casks line the warehouse, stacked in quiet rows, each one a vessel of transformation. New make spirit, raw and colorless, is filled into oak barrels at around 63.5% alcohol. From this moment, time and wood become the distiller's silent partners. The cask isn't just a container, it's an ingredient as vital as barley or water. Over years, sometimes decades, the spirit seeps in and out of the oak with every swing in temperature and humidity. The warehouse breathes with the Scottish climate. Cool, damp air slows evaporation and deepens the exchange between spirit and wood. Inside the cask, chemistry unfolds at a patient pace. The spirit extracts vanillin, coconut-scented lactones and tannins from the oak, layering sweetness, spice, and structure onto the whiskey. American oak, once charred for bourbon, lends notes of vanilla and caramel. European oak, seasoned with Oloroso sherry, brings dried fruit and baking spice. Each cask is unique, shaped by its previous life and the forest it came from. Some distilleries fill spirit into a mix of ex-bourbon and ex-sherry casks, building a palette of flavors for the blender's hand. Over time, the whiskey softens. Harsh aldehydes and sulfur compounds left over from distillation are drawn out and tamed by the wood, subtractive maturation at work. Meanwhile, oxygen seeps through the cask's pores, oxidizing the spirit and coaxing out subtle flavors. The whiskey darkens, picking up color from the charred staves. Every year, about 2% of the spirit evaporates, lost to the heavens as the angels share. In a warehouse filled with thousands of casks, the cost of patience is measured in barrels that slowly empty, their contents drifting away into the highland mist. After 3 years, the spirit earns the right to be called Scotch, but most single malts rest far longer. 12, 18, even 50 years are common. With each passing season, the influence of oak grows deeper. By the time the cask is opened, up to 70% of the whiskey's flavor comes from its long sleep in wood. The result is a spirit that carries the memory of forests, seasons, and years gone by, ready to be shaped and blended into the final expression. Rachel stands in the blending room, surrounded by rows of cask samples pulled from decades of maturation. Her task is not to create something new from scratch, but to capture the essence of the distillery, again and again, year after year. This is the paradox of single malt. Every bottle is a blend, but only of whiskies made at one distillery. Hundreds of casks, each shaped by age, wood, and time, are married together to achieve a flavor as recognizable as a signature. The work demands a palate trained to catch the faintest differences, a hint of dried fruit from an old sherry cask, the vanilla sweetness of American oak, a wisp of peat from a smoky barrel. Rachel draws samples, assesses color, aroma, and taste, and begins to build the final marriage. Some casks are bold, others subtle. A few are so unique they stand alone, destined for special releases, but most are chosen for their ability to harmonize, to fill gaps and round edges. Consistency is the goal, yet the raw material is anything but predictable. The Scottish climate, the quirks of oak, the slow evaporation of the angel's share, all conspire to make each cask an individual. Rachel's job is to tame that chaos, to ensure that a bottle opened in Tokyo matches one poured in Glasgow. Consistency is the constant she pursues. Once the blend is set, the whiskey faces a crossroads. Some distilleries choose to chill filter, cooling the whiskey to near freezing between 0 and 4 degrees Celsius, so that fatty acids and proteins clump and can be removed. This keeps the whiskey clear when ice or water is added, a nod to aesthetics and mass-market expectations. But chill filtration also strips away mouthfeel and subtle flavors, a fact that stirs debate among purists. Rachel weighs the decision clarity and shelf appeal, or texture and authenticity. Coloring is another choice. Caramel coloring called E150 can be added to standardize the whiskey's appearance across batches and markets. Some brands rely on it to deliver a uniform amber glow, regardless of cask variation. Critics argue that this masks the true story of the whiskey's maturation, flattening the individuality that years in oak should bring. Others accept it as a practical tool, a way to meet consumer expectations in a world that often equates color with quality. Color matters to many drinkers, but it can also hide history. Single malt, by law, means whiskey from a single distillery, but it is almost always a blend of many casks and not a single barrel, unless that is specifically stated. Rachel's final blend is reduced to bottling strength, usually between 40 and 46% alcohol by volume. Each decision, whether to filter, to color, or to bottle at cask strength, shapes the whiskey's identity as much as the barley or the peat. The choices are technical, and they are deeply personal. The last act is bottling. Labels are applied, corks are pressed in, cases are stacked for shipment. The journey that began with a handful of barley now ends with a liquid ready to face the world, carrying the signature of both place and person. When that bottle is opened, it is both product and story, a marriage of casks and a record of decisions made long before you lift your glass. Every year, global demand for single malt Scotch climbs, yet each cask still requires years of patience and trust in nature's slow work. In a world obsessed with instant results, this spirit stands as proof that true complexity cannot be rushed or faked. The next glass you pour is not just a drink, it is time, transformed. Share your own Scotch story in the comments below.